Difficult people count on one thing, that you'll play the game on their terms. They escalate, you escalate back. They accuse, you defend. They push, you push back. And the moment you do any of those things, you've already lost. Not the argument, the dynamic. Because now they're in control of how you respond, which means they're in control of you. The trick isn't to fight harder, it's to change what game you're playing, entirely. Number 1, say less than you think you need to. When someone is being difficult, aggressive, dismissive, unreasonable, relentlessly critical, the natural instinct is to explain yourself, to justify your position, to give reasons, add context, clarify what you meant, correct their misreading of you. The more pressure you feel, the more you talk. This is exactly the wrong move. And it's not just tactically wrong, it's psychologically wrong, in a way that makes the situation worse in a very specific and predictable direction. In social interactions, the amount you explain yourself under pressure functions as a status signal. Over-explanation communicates anxiety, specifically anxiety about how you're being perceived. It signals that the other person's judgment matters to you in a way that gives them leverage. And in interpersonal dynamics, leverage tends to be used. People who sense that you're trying to manage their impression of you become more dominant in response, not less. The submissive signal invites a dominant counter-response. The dynamic escalates precisely because you were trying to calm it down. The alternative is deceptively simple. Say less. Not because the words don't matter, but because fewer words, offered calmly, without the anxious undertone of someone seeking approval, communicates something entirely different. It communicates that the other person's reaction isn't determining your behavior, that you're not scrambling to manage how you're perceived, that you're not rattled. Silence isn't a weakness. In the architecture of a difficult interaction, it's among the most powerful signals available. The person who speaks less, under pressure, almost always has more control over the room than the person who speaks more. Number 2, stop trying to change their mind. Here is something almost nobody understands about difficult people. The harder you push them toward a position, the more committed to the opposite position they become. This isn't stubbornness in the normal sense. When someone perceives that their freedom to hold a belief or make a choice is being threatened, they experience an automatic motivational push to reassert that freedom. The most direct way to reassert it is to become more committed to the position being challenged. So the argument you make to change their mind doesn't just fail to work, it actively makes them dig in deeper. Difficult people are especially susceptible to this. The defining quality of someone who is chronically difficult is often a heightened sensitivity to perceived control, to feeling managed, redirected, or told what to think. When you attempt to persuade them, correct them, or demonstrate that they're wrong, you are not having a rational conversation about evidence. You are triggering a threat response. Their brain reads the persuasion attempt as an attack on their autonomy, and it responds accordingly. The practical implication is radical. Stop engaging with the content of what they're saying. Stop trying to win the argument on its merits. Not because you're conceding, but because the argument is the wrong battlefield entirely. What works instead is engaging with the dynamic rather than the content, shifting from persuasion to curiosity, from correction to questions, from pushing to stepping back. When someone no longer feels they need to defend their position from you, the reactance mechanism deactivates, the grip loosens, and a conversation that was locked tight suddenly has room to move. You're not giving up. You're playing a different game, one that actually has a path to resolution. Number 3, name what's happening without making them feel bad. There's a version of addressing a difficult interaction that almost always makes things worse. Attacking the person. Telling someone they're being unreasonable, aggressive, manipulative, or unfair is an identity-level assault. It tells them something is wrong with who they are. And identity-level assaults produce one reliable response: defensiveness. Once someone is defending their identity, they are no longer listening. The conversation is over. Whatever you were actually trying to resolve is now buried under a fight about whether they're a bad person. The alternative is precise and counterintuitive. You describe the behavior without labeling the person. You speak from your own observation rather than making a judgment about their character. And critically, you use language that takes ownership of your own experience rather than assigning blame for it. This is what researchers call I language, framing statements around your own feelings and perceptions rather than accusations about what the other person did or failed to do. Instead of "you're being aggressive," you say, "I notice the conversation has become heated and I'm finding it hard to follow." Instead of "you're not listening," you say, "I feel like my point isn't landing and I'm not sure why." The content is similar. The The psychological effect is entirely different. The mechanism is the face. When you attack a person directly, when you label them or accuse them, you threaten their social self-image. Defending face becomes the priority, and the original issue disappears. When you describe behavior without labeling the person, you leave their identity intact. There's nothing to defend. The conversation can stay on the actual problem rather than spiraling into a battle about who they are. This isn't softening your message, it's making it land instead of bouncing off. Number 4. Stay curious longer than is comfortable. The moment you shift from listening to defending, the difficult person wins. Not because they've made a good argument, but because you've handed them control of your emotional state. You're now reacting to them rather than engaging with them. And reacting, in a difficult interaction, is always a losing position. The alternative is to stay in a mode that feels deeply unnatural under pressure. Genuine curiosity. Not performed curiosity, where you're visibly waiting for your turn to rebut. Actual curiosity, about what they mean, what they want, what's underneath the position they're holding. Asking questions you don't already know the answer to. Listening to understand, rather than to respond. This works for a specific psychological reason. When someone feels genuinely listened to, when they sense that the person across from them is actually trying to understand rather than defeat them, something measurable happens. The defensiveness drops. The escalation slows. The emotional temperature of the interaction shifts, not because anything has been resolved, but because the felt experience of being heard satisfies something the difficult behavior was, in many cases, trying to get in the first place. The practical ask is specific. Stay curious for longer than your instinct tells you to. Not indefinitely, not submissively, but past the point where you feel the urge to jump in and correct or defend. Ask one more question. Reflect back what you heard before you respond. Let the silence sit a beat longer than feels comfortable. What you're doing, underneath all of this, is changing the nature of the interaction. You came in as an adversary. By staying curious, you become something else. Someone who is actually trying to understand. That shift, when it's genuine, is almost impossible for a difficult person to maintain their position against. Number 5. Control the pace, not the content. Difficult people escalate through speed. The rapid-fire accusation before you've had time to process the last one. The question that demands an immediate answer. The pressure that builds precisely because the interaction is moving faster than your ability to think clearly. Speed is how they keep you reactive rather than deliberate, and reactive is exactly where they need you to be. What most people do is try to control the content of the interaction. They focus on what is being said, correcting the facts, reframing the accusation, defending the position. All of that is happening at the wrong level. The content is almost irrelevant compared to the pace, because the pace determines whether either of you is capable of actually thinking. The mechanism here is emotional contagion, the well-documented process by which one person's emotional state spreads to another through automatic mimicry of expressions, vocal patterns, and physical signals. In a tense interaction, this process runs in both directions. If you match the pace and intensity of a difficult person, you catch their emotional state. Your arousal rises, your prefrontal processing degrades, and you become less capable of the very responses that would actually be useful. But the process runs the other way too. A calm, measured, deliberately slow response creates a physiological pull in the other direction. This is why slowing down works, not as a technique, but as a physiological intervention. When you take a deliberate pause before responding, when you speak more slowly and quietly than the situation seems to call for, when you ask a question rather than firing back, you are not just modeling calm. You are actively exerting a regulatory pull on the other person's nervous system. Their pace has to slow to meet yours if the conversation is going to continue at all. You don't win a difficult interaction by being faster. You win it by being slower. Number 6. Give them a way out. Most difficult interactions don't end because someone wins the argument. They end, or they don't end, because of something entirely separate from the argument itself. Whether the other person can disengage without feeling they've lost face. Face is the psychological term for the social self-image a person projects and protects in interaction. It's not vanity in the shallow sense. It's something closer to dignity, the sense of being seen as competent, reasonable, and worthy of respect. In conflict, face is almost always at stake, even when the surface content is about something entirely practical. And when someone feels their face is threatened, when continuing the conflict means risking humiliation, or ending it means admitting they were wrong, they will keep fighting. Not because they believe in the position anymore, but because stopping has become personally costly. This is why difficult people often can't just stop. The interaction has escalated to a point where backing down feels like losing something real. Every move you make to win the argument makes it harder for them to end it on tolerable terms. You're not just right, you're right in a way that requires them to be publicly wrong. And publicly wrong is a state most people will do considerable psychological work to avoid. The strategic move is to build them a door, not by conceding your position, but by offering them a version of the exit that preserves enough of their self-image to make walking through it possible. Acknowledge something, not the substance of their position, but the fact that they have concerns, that the situation is genuinely complicated, that you understand why they feel the way they do. Reframe the disagreement as a shared problem rather than a verdict on their character. Give them a line they can use, internally or to others, that lets them step back without it reading as defeat. The paradox is that giving someone a way out feels like weakness from the inside, like you're letting them off the hook. But the person who provides the exit controls how the interaction ends. That's not weakness. That's the whole game. Notice what all 6 of these have in common. None of them are about being nicer. None of them require you to pretend the difficult person isn't being difficult, or to absorb treatment you shouldn't have to absorb, or to abandon your position to keep the peace. What they share is something more precise. They all involve not giving the difficult person the response their behavior was designed to produce, the over-explanation they need to feel dominant, the argument they need to dig deeper into, the escalation they need to feel justified, the loss of face that makes stopping impossible. That's the quiet part, not the absence of conflict, the presence of someone who understood what was actually happening. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and click the video on screen for more videos like this.